Silent Night is one of the most loved Christmas songs in the world. This story takes you back to 1818, the year the song was written. It all starts with a little mouse. Once upon a time, long, long ago, in the country of Austria, there lived a little mouse. His name was Caspar Kleinmaus, Caspar Little Mouse. Although he was the tiniest creature in the whole village of Oberndorf, he had the biggest house. He lived in the church of St. Nicholas. He had been there since the day he was born. It was here that he had been given his name. Caspar would never forget that night. Some pine branches had been placed around the altar. There, in the middle of the branches, Caspar saw his first Christmas manger scene. Mary smiled at the infant Jesus as Joseph and the angels stood by. Caspar had wanted to get a better look at the painted wooden figures, so he climbed to the edge of the manger. The smell of the pine branches made him very sleepy. He closed his eyes. The next thing he knew, a young man was bending over him. "Ah, you little mouse," he said softly. "Have you come like the wise men to visit the Christ child? I shall call you Caspar, after one of them, Caspar Kleinmaus." The young man stroked the mouse's velvety fur and spoke so kindly that Caspar didn't want to run away. Caspar soon saw that the whole village loved this young pastor, Father Joseph Moore, and he soon found out that Father Moore loved to sing. Since Caspar never grew tired of listening, he went to every church service. The choir master, Franz Gruber, played the organ and led the singing. Caspar was sure that no choir in the whole world sang as sweetly as theirs. "I don't know why I love music so," Caspar often said to himself. "I don't know why, I just do." All went well in Caspar's life until one day when the choir master noticed a small hole in the wall. Father Moore happened to be in church. "What's that?" Mr. Gruber asked. "I didn't know that we had mice in our church. We'll have to get a cat." The tone of his voice made Caspar tremble in his hiding place. Caspar heard Father Moore's gentle answer. "You are both right and wrong, Franz. The church does not have mice, it has a mouse." Then he told how he had found Caspar in the Christmas manger. Mr. Gruber could see that Father Moore had a special feeling for this little mouse. "But," he said, "I really don't believe the church is the proper place for a mouse, do you?" "Maybe not," asked Father Moore, "but there is nothing I can do about it. He was born here, and he will have to stay here." How happy Caspar was to hear that Father Moore wanted him to stay, and that he would not be getting a cat. Now the winter holidays had come again. Usually at this time of year, Franz Gruber came often to the church to practice on the old organ. Mr. Gruber always brought goodies to snack on, cookies, cakes, even cheese. He left behind lots of good crumbs that Caspar ate up. But this year was different. The organ wasn't working right. The keys kept sticking. Every note sounded flat, and Mr. Gruber hardly came to practice. And Caspar was getting very hungry. "I've never been so empty," he groaned. "I must eat something, but what?" Caspar looked around the church. When his eyes rested on the organ, he remembered a story his mother had told him. Many years ago, his mother's mother had lived for 2 whole weeks on a pair of leather shoelaces. "Whoopee," Caspar cheered. "The organ bellows are leather. I'll eat them. The organ sounds so bad, I'm sure no one will care." Opening his mouth as wide as he could, Casper took a great big bite. My, this thing is tough, he said to himself, worse than the oldest cheese. I only hope I don't break a tooth. It wasn't a very good meal, but the leather filled Casper's stomach. He climbed into a pew and curled up for a nap. Just then, Mr. Gruber came into the church. Naturally, he had to practice for the Christmas Eve service. He sat down at the organ and struck the keys. Not a sound came out. Oh, heavens, he cried. Now the organ doesn't work at all. There were tears in his voice, and he kept running his hands back and forth through his hair. What shall we do? All our beautiful hymns. If only the organ had lasted until after midnight mass. As Casper looked on, Mr. Gruber checked the organ to see what was wrong. Just as I thought, shouted Mr. Gruber when he saw the bellows full of holes. It was that mouse. I must tell Father Moore at once, and out he rushed. Why is Mr. Gruber so upset? Casper wondered. The old organ hadn't been working right anyhow. Besides, Mr. Gruber didn't need the organ to play music. He could play the guitar just as well. Some people said Mr. Gruber really liked the guitar better than the organ. Didn't he spend all his free time writing music for the guitar? And hadn't Casper done good things for St. Nicholas? He kept the floors neat and tidy. He cleaned up all the crumbs and bits of paper. With a clear conscience, he curled up again in his pew and went to sleep. Casper slept and slept. Just how long, he didn't know. He woke up suddenly at the sound of creaking door hinges. The little mouse jumped up and looked around him. He saw Father Moore kneeling before the dimly lit altar. The priest was wearing an overcoat and holding his hat by his side. Casper could hear him speaking out loud. Was he saying a prayer? Casper went closer to listen. This is what Casper heard. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Round yon virgin, mother and child, holy infant so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Casper knew that Father Moore often knelt alone to pray, yet somehow this silent night, holy night, did not sound like a prayer to Casper. Casper was curious. Why was the priest here so late at night, and why was he dressed to go out? Casper made up his mind to follow Father Moore. The night was cold and bright with stars. The priest walked briskly, and Casper ran behind him in the moonlight. They came to a cottage, and Father Moore knocked on the door. It was opened by Franz Gruber. Father Moore, the choirmaster said, please come in. The priest stomped the snow from his feet and stepped inside. No one noticed that Casper ran in behind him. Father Moore said, I'm sorry to be calling on you so late, Franz. I know it is past midnight. I have something I very much want to share with you. Fine, fine, said Mr. Gruber. You know we are always glad to see you. He called his wife. Come, Elizabeth, Father Moore is here. Miss Gruber came out of the kitchen. How nice to see you, Father, she said. Don't worry about waking the children, for they have been asleep for hours, and I'm still putting cookies into the oven. Casper sniffed the air. He followed the delicious sugary smell right into the kitchen. He squeaked for joy. Miss Gruber had not yet swept the floor, and there were cookie crumbs everywhere. He dashed here and there, eating up all the crumbs until the floor was clean. By the time he got back to the front room, Father Moore was about to leave. The Grubers were excited about something. Casper thought Father Moore looked pleased too. Really, Father, I think your poem is beautiful. Silent night, holy night, Mr. Gruber repeated. Oh, thank you very, very much. I had hoped you would like it, said Father Moore. I certainly do, and I'll start working on your idea right away. The next day was Christmas Eve. That night, Casper watched the crowds with their lanterns as they hurried to church in their holiday clothes. Casper hoped Father Moore was not too worried about the organ and that Mr. Gruber had forgiven him. Inside, many candles were burning upon the high altar. The church was decorated with small evergreen trees and branches of pine. As Casper gazed at the Christmas manger, Father Moore and the altar boys entered. Father Moore spoke. "Welcome to the Midnight Mass," he said. "I'm sorry to tell you that we will not have the usual organ music. The organ is broken." The people started whispering among themselves. "What? No music? How can this be?" Casper felt bad. This was all his fault. I had better leave town as soon as the service is over, he decided. They'll be sure to get a cat now. Father Moore raised his hand and said, "We cannot let the broken organ spoil the joyous celebration." Just then, Casper saw Mr. Gruber pick up his guitar. To his great surprise, the choir master began to play and sing. His voice filled the church. Then Father Moore joined Mr. Gruber in the song. Right away, Casper recognized the words. Everyone was asking questions at once. What was the name of that beautiful song? Why haven't we heard it before? Who wrote the words, the music? Mr. Gruber stepped from the choir loft and told the story. In the early hours of that very morning, Father Moore had written a poem about their little village of Oberdorf sleeping so peacefully. The holy quietness of Christmas seemed to fill every home, great and small, rich and poor, just as it had done in the little town of Bethlehem once, long, long ago. Before dawn, Father Moore had trudged through the snow to bring these words to Franz Gruber. The organist had been inspired and immediately composed the music. Since a mouse had eaten holes in the organ bellows, he decided to play the melody on his guitar. All the people were wild with joy. This new Christmas hymn was played for the first time in their very own church. How wonderful! And it had been written by their very own pastor and organist. Merry Christmas, everybody, the happy crowd called as they hurried home. Merry Christmas. Casper felt lonely. Just then someone said, "Now don't forget, if there had not been holes in the bellows, we would not have heard the same old organ. We wouldn't have heard the same old organ of the same Christmas songs." Maybe you're right, Mr. Gruber said with a smile. Here's thanks to the mouse. Casper could hardly believe his ears. Suddenly everyone was pleased, so Casper was happy again. Now he knew that he would not have to leave his home, and he knew too that St. Nicholas would never get a cat. This story is partly true. Father Joseph Moore and Franz Gruber wrote the song Silent Night in Oberndorf, Austria in 1818. When it was sung for the first time in the Church of St. Nicholas, it was accompanied by the guitar because the church organ was broken.